BoE buys long tenor British government debt. Is BoE still ambitious to tighten liquidity? However, these actions actually show at easings of liquidity.
Yes, so the Bank of England is in a quandary, clearly, because it's already signaled that it needs to tighten the monetary policy stance to keep inflation in check. It's been signaling a quantitative tightening, i.e. an unwinding of the assets it holds on its balance sheet. But of course, it's been put in a situation where it's watched extreme volatility in the gilt market with worries about impacts on financial stability, including in the pension sector. And so therefore it had little option other than to intervene. And so I think this should be seen as an emergency response to an extreme set of circumstances. The Bank of England has successfully lent down on longer dated gilt yields. It's given an indication that there is some support there, but I think its overriding objective is to make sure that it delivers lower inflation and keeps inflation expectations in check. It's the same problem that all the global central banks face at the moment with inflation high. If they fail to keep inflation expectations down, they'll only end up having to keep interest rates higher for longer overall, with even bigger output costs in the longer term. So that the Bank of England has had little option but to get involved at this point in time. But clearly it's something it would have liked to not to have had to do. But given that the government has given no indication of its intention to change either its policy or its intention to give a fiscal update in late November, then the Bank of England had no alternative but to intervene.
Okay, can this policy of buying government bonds calm the market?
Well, it already has done. In terms of some of the indications that we would normally look at for instability and uncertainty, volatility, bid-offer spreads have come in. The yield, which on a 10-year and 30-year basis had rocketed, has reversed. So it's achieved its objective, its near-term objective. But there's a wider issue. The underlying problem still has to be addressed, which is the government has announced a fiscal stimulus, which is out of kilter with the intention to rein in demand, given various supply constraints to keep inflation in check. And also on the fiscal side, the government has given no clear indication that it recognizes that there's an issue here with the degree of gilt issuance and the concern in the bond market. So until the government's position changes, then the Bank of England has to be on standby to continue to intervene beyond the measures that it's already announced.
Okay, Ken. Okay, next question will be Bu Win. Bu Win, teman-teman kita para WNI di sana seperti apa bertahan di kondisi saat ini? Ya, rata-rata mungkin sebagian besar students ya yang dapat beasiswa ya. Tapi apa yang mungkin bisa diceritakan paling berat deh kondisinya saat ini?
Seperti saya ungkapkan sebelumnya ya Mbak, ini terutama untuk student dengan keluarga tanpa tunjangan keluarga dan membawa keluarga sehingga harus membayar flat dengan skema yang jauh lebih tinggi, dan itu bisa jadi menghabiskan 70 sampai 90% dari beasiswanya, sementara di tahun pertama penerima beasiswa itu tidak diperkenankan untuk bekerja. Itu mungkin yang agak berat ya Pak. Untuk yang lain, mungkin untuk kebutuhan lain, mungkin teman-teman sangat prihatin dan sangat bisa mensiasati, terutama untuk gerakan reduce, reuse, recycle. Jadi kami sudah terbiasa membeli barang-barang yang atau baju-baju di charity shop gitu ya, itu sudah jadi stylist teman-teman juga sih, dan alhamdulillah ya kebiasaan itu pun juga terbawa. Dan saya pikir saya memahami bahwa beasiswa memang pemberian beasiswa itu diberikan pada batas cukup ya, bukan batas lebih gitu. Tapi sekarang batasnya menjadi batas atasnya naik. Kami berharap dengan kondisi seperti ini seharusnya masing-masing universitas di UK juga memperhatikan mahasiswa-mahasiswa internasionalnya dan mempertimbangkan memberikan bantuan untuk mereka, karena kan tidak murah ya. SPP tuition fee mahasiswa tidak murah di sini Mbak, dan harusnya support dari pemerintah, support dari universitas itu jauh lebih besar untuk mahasiswa internasional.
Oke, cukup terbayang kondisi di sana. Next questions, I move to Ken. Ken, the World Bank report said that the growth in the world's three largest economy, the United States, China, and the Euro area, have already slowed sharply due to inflations, and these conditions could lead to recessions. What decisive step should be taken by the UK and related parties, such as the BoE, in the midst of this condition?
Well, I think we have to accept inevitably that economic activity globally, and particularly in certain regions, is going to be much weaker in the future. So we have a supply-demand imbalance, which has led to a very pronounced and sustained rise in inflation, an increasingly broad-based rise in inflation, it should be pointed out. And if you're a central bank with a price stability objective, and many of the advanced economy central banks have either sole or dual mandates, which include that objective, then you have to deal with the problem that you're facing. So the Federal Reserve has made it absolutely clear that it intends to slow the economy down. It's aiming for a soft landing, but in the past, whenever the unemployment rate has been this low and the Fed has been worried about inflation, then it's ended up tightening and tipping the economy into recession. So that's clearly a significant risk. In Europe, there are some other headwinds at play. We have obviously a major energy problem, both in terms of supply shortages and also prices. That's squeezing household real incomes. Again, that's leading central banks to try and tighten policy to squeeze inflation and inflation expectations. And we think already probably in continental Europe, a recession is emerging. Our forecast is for a contraction in real GDP in the fourth quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year in the euro area and the EU. And the likelihood is that period of weakness could be even more protracted than we expect. The UK is probably already in recession. Consumer spending data has been extremely weak. Confidence has fallen off a cliff. That's not unique to the UK, but probably the UK is ahead of continental Europe and the US in already falling into a period of contracting activity. And I don't really think there's much the authorities can do about it. Central banks have to keep on tightening for the time being because inflation is so elevated. And as we've seen, when a government tries to lean against that with a fiscal stimulus plan, given the circumstances, the market reaction is very negative.